For this conversation, we're going to be discussing the future of the Black Sea region, technology, energy, and infrastructure. I'm still working for CNN since the last panel. You know Mircea. And now we have Koray, Ertaş, the ambassador of Turkey to Romania and fashion consultant, always helping us look our best. I want to start broad because usually being an American, even though I live in London, it's kind of outside looking, inside looking out. So I'd like to start outside looking in. How has the election of Donald Trump, we're now 2 years in basically, changed the perspective for the Black Sea region? Mircea?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mentioned in my first panel, I have a very vivid recollection of President G.W. Bush on the, I think it was not far from here, with the former president of Romania visiting the Black Sea shore. It was a moment, it was 2008, when NATO was discussing at the summit in Bucharest about extending membership action plan, a sort of a waiting room for Georgia, I think for the former Republic of Macedonia. And for the first time in the history of NATO, the German and the French leaders basically blocked the American president's intention at the NATO summit to go with NATO enlargement even further in the Balkans and across the Black Sea. That was a moment now in retrospect that are telling us, I think, that the election of President Trump, with all its amplification and all this very complex new developments, is not just due to him. They're older trends, they're more structural, and I think a certain fatigue. Mehmet was speaking of the fatigue for big projects in energy. There is also fatigue in Europe and in NATO for going even beyond our traditional work of interest. And the last thing about President Trump, I was watching attentively his speech at the UN. And of course, there was a portion which was a little bit more hilarious at a certain moment of his speech.
Depends from whose point of view.
It was hilarious because lots of people laughed, and also he understood that people laughed, and he also tried to make the best out of a difficult situation.
But do you really think that he understood why people were laughing?
I don't think so. I think he's convinced he's the best American president ever.
He said as much.
I'm convinced he believes that, and you know, leaders have egos. Nothing new under the sun. But the real thing is that for the first time we see an American president contesting the very world order that America has created after the Second World War, specifically. Not because of the vagaries of American politics. America is a country that sometimes goes very international, sometimes withdraws into isolationism. This is nothing new. But for the first time, I heard an American president, for the first time, systematically, in his speech at the UN, which was not a joke. The speech was the speech of the American president, like him or not, talking against globalization, saying that globalism is bad. Sovereignty, national sovereignty is good. Taking upon the World Trade Organization, which in the end is also a creation of America and the West. Taking systematically on the pillars of the world order. So the question to me is not about President Trump. How do we replace that? How costly and how aggressive the world will become? Because nature abhors vacuum. And geopolitics abhors vacuum and lack of leadership. And for us Romanians on the shores of the Black Sea, seeing the West, America and Europe, somehow going away from the contract that we also signed as members of the UN NATO is sometimes very scary. So we have a sense of danger, not because of President Trump, because we see the world as we knew it changing, and change usually comes with conflict, violence, and tension.
Usually I like to go back and forth, but I'm just going to keep you on pause for 1 second, because I want to challenge you on one thing, not because I think you're wrong, but certainly President Trump didn't take any cues from Germany and France. That's not the way this president operates. So do you think that was more coincidental than anything, the fact that France and Germany were trying to hold off NATO? Or do you think that that really was about the bigger picture? How do you connect the dots between France and Germany and then President Trump? I mean, I know you're coming to the same outcome, restricting NATO, but is there an underlying connector there?
There is I believe that there is a deep disbelief in President Trump about multilateral structures like the European Union. He believes that bilateral connections are much better. So what he tried to do explicitly by inviting President Macron to the White House, putting the red carpet, a state dinner,
and vice versa.
Hugs, Bastille Day in Paris the year before. It was obvious. And then Chancellor Merkel, just a few days after, receiving second-tier reception by the same administration. What was behind that? He likes Macron and dislikes Merkel? Of course not. We're in the business of leadership. He was trying to separate the French-German couple, because this couple is the engine of the European Union. And deliberately he tried to seduce France, not Macron, seduce France, and say, listen, why don't you come together into something which is bilateral? That's why he encouraged Brexit, while Obama didn't. President Obama said, no, Brexit is bad. He said he applauded Brexit. Why? Because he believes that dealing with the world with no blocks, it's easier for America to reign supreme. That's a very pragmatic calculation and goes into his deep disbelief of multilateral structures. And this is a problem because the world is run by multilateral structures, like the UN, like the EU, like NATO, like any other organization.
Turkey's ambassador to Romania. So I do want to hear how it affects Turkey. I do want to hear how it affects Romania, but also the Black Sea region, what it means for everybody here as a whole as well.
Sure. Well, as diplomats, as you know, we have some limits when we talk about political leaderships of third countries. So I try.
So we don't have to follow the limits today, don't
less
we?
boring, if I may try to be while try to be talking diplomatic. First of all, before going this, I was so happy when I saw the invitation to me and the title of the event, because this is my fourth year here, and in the last 4 years, I attended many conferences, events, which were solely focusing on security and the new security challenges in the region. Obviously, especially after 2014, but I agree, it goes back to 2008 as well. Strikingly, after 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea, there are real changes in the region and real challenges. So nobody dismissed that. We have to be realists. But on the other hand, there's a huge potential in the region. I really like your introduction speech here, which is quite enlightening, and it was also underlining the importance of the regional ownership and the necessity for that. And I'm so happy in a city like Constanta, which can really be an important hub and a center in that regard. For the first time, we gather together and focus on the positive side, on the opportunity side of what we have in our hand. And I'll be quite happy. I actually had some prepared remarks and to give our vision on how we see Black Sea. To come to your point, this is again a real challenge. We are seeing, this is my personal view, about tectonic changes in international politics. I do agree that the first phase of the post-Cold War era is almost over, and now we are seeing the fledgling, the first steps of the second phase. I don't know what will it look like, but we are entering into an era where the two sides of the Atlantic are harshly criticizing one another, and they don't hesitate to use harsh words on the record. We are living in a world where the flag keeper of free market economy, of globalization, and its president is saying words against that and taking steps against it, raising walls.
If you believe Bob Woodward's book, the reporting, there's a quote in the book that President Trump said, "Trade is bad." That's Bob Woodward's reporting.
Well, we are hearing quite interesting things from that side of the Atlantic. And interestingly, on that side of Europe, we also see some puzzling. We see increasing divisions, not only between rich and poor or others, but between East and West. Because as far as I can read, again, as a personal observation, the eastern side of the continent drags food to accept this new changing reality. Because it's so frightening. It is so frightening to see that the old patterns are actually trembling and shaking. The western side, especially the Franco-German side, is actually too fast to say, well, we already lost the US, we can no longer trust them for our own security, so we have to take our own security into our own hands. Let's do something within the EU. But on that part, people are more Atlanticist, and they say, no, these are not happening actually, these are occasional developments and it will pass soon. We'll see where the reality is, you know, because while we are reading the statements of the leaders, and probably I will have some questions here about my own leader, President Erdogan, we forget one major issue, which is the rules of the politics. It's all same everywhere. All politics are local. And I'm sure when he's speaking on the UN lectern, he's also speaking to his constituents. He's thinking about the upcoming elections also, rather than thinking what Europe thinks or what others thinks. Since we were so much focused into internal politics, and since populism is the currency of the day in many parts of the world, including in all democracies, unfortunately we will continue to see these challenges. I think it depends. It puts huge responsibility on statesmen like people, to diplomats, to academia as well, who has no relationship with direct politics and who has no baggage in that sense, who doesn't need to think what will happen in the next election, to keep the balance straight, to not to leave things get out of control. So these statements and a clear change in the policies obviously affected the region, especially some actors. I cannot speak on behalf of third countries, but I'm sure, for example, as a very strong friend of Georgia, for instance, Georgia and Turkey are so close. I know Romania and Georgia are also so close, but since we have a land border, Turkey is the lifeline of Georgia, given its huge problems with the Russians, so there is no other way. So the border is effectively not there, so we can travel to each other with ID cards. We are using the same airport like in the French Geneva model. But if I were a Georgian, for example, I'll be quite fearful to see these upcoming statements from other side of the Atlantic. The same will probably go for many of other allies in the region. So yes, leaders are talking more and more, thinking about domestic politics, more on populism basis, but it has repercussions in this part of the world. I hope people do not lose their trust to the Western ideal and our common community. This is the real danger, actually. But otherwise, as cautious optimists, I can also say, regardless of these, hilarious sometimes speeches, the road will not that much deviate from its original path.
I always like to think of Carlos Slim, the Mexican billionaire. I know his family, and what they always say about him is his genius is when everybody else says, oh, shoot, everything's going wrong, great opportunity. European financial crisis. He comes in, buys a lot of properties, all worth much more now. So I'm just wondering, is this an opportunity for the Black Sea region? What would be what are the natural instincts in this region, given the uncertainty that you're seeing in Europe and the United States? What's a natural knee-jerk reaction, and what will be the effects on the area, and what could be a positive? What would Carlos Slim do? Once the richest man in the world, now I think he's just number 3, poor him. What are the natural reactions? What are the opportunities, Mircea?
I think not only the Mexican billionaire's instincts are right. I think the instinct that in any crisis there is also an opportunity functions, including in this part of the world. It's obviously such a situation. There are basically 3 dimensions that overlap. The first one is a less united West. That's a reality. And this is something which is very bad. There is another reality, which is Russia, which with a very poor hand, with not much. The economy is relatively weak. Of course, it's a formidable country in terms of territory, big military, nuclear power. They play these things quite well. The annexation of Crimea, it was not only about the Black Sea. It was the springboard towards Syria and the Mediterranean and the greater Middle East for Russia. So that's another factor which is a reality. But the third factor, and of course, all these things together also led to some nuances in the foreign policy of Turkey, realignments of all sorts in the Gulf, Iran, Israel, all these things are together. But one thing which makes me feel an opportunity is the unstoppable rise of Asia and the unstoppable need for the West, including for small geographies like my country, to be part of this unavoidable journey together. And when I say Asia, I don't speak only about China, because there are lots of people speaking about China. China is a big, big elephant, and they're growing. But it's also India, it's also Vietnam, it's also Kazakhstan, it's also Azerbaijan, not only Georgia. So all these countries are coming to the forefront of world affairs, and their share of global GDP is going to increase dramatically. US now is probably 20-something% of world GDP. Together with Europe, we are less than half. So what I'm saying, and I go back to Mehmet's case, instead of dreaming of big strategies, I will use this uncertainty to build some unavoidable connecting dots between the unavoidable connection between the Western economies and the Asian economies, and we have to get some piece of the action. Do ferry boats. There's no way. I was in government, and we tried to have a sort of a government-sponsored ferry line between Constanta and Georgia, Batumi or Poti, whatever. And sometimes we try to do a stop in Ukraine. I say this not because we have our Turkish friends here. Without having a ferry line that includes a big Black Sea Turkish port, there is no viability economically for any ferry line, because the only country in the Black Sea region that has the commercial depth and volumes is Turkey. I give you this small example for things like this. I don't know if LNG terminals will fly or not. Probably not here, because it's complicated. But I do know that in terms of the maritime Danube and the Black Sea, the Chinese are not discovering, the geography of the planet. I remember in the 90s, all these corridors that now are European corridors were done by the Japanese. The first study on these corridors were done by the Japanese. So what I'm just trying to say, and also the competition that America tries to spur to stop China's race with India, with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand, the Indo-Pacific community, is also opportunity for us. want the Chinese to come towards Europe and play game in this country? If it's benign, why not? But why not have a Japanese investment? Why not try to work with countries from the Gulf? And this is something I believe is an opportunity. If we come with viable programs and if we are really smart in using uncertainty, because we are the only, I would say this with emphatic voice this time around. I think Romania is the only predictable country, not very efficient, not always well administered, but in terms of our determination to stay true to our alliances and to Europe and to our ties with America and NATO, this is stable land. This is stable. This is a place where your investment would not go away. The question is if investment would happen. But once somebody decides to come in and invest in this country, this is rock solid in terms of our geopolitics. That's a plus. And I think we have to use this to our advantage in a very pragmatic way.
So, Mr. Ambassador, given the commercial depth that Mircea was talking about from your country, what are the opportunities that you see here, given the landscape that we're talking about, the tectonic shifts that you described in the west and west of the Atlantic Ocean as well? What are those opportunities for a place like Constanta?
Sure. I actually do agree with Mr. Geoana. We shouldn't continue to keep with the ideological thinking of, let's say, early 1990s, even in the Cold War era. There are now huge opportunities. Let's say 3 decades ago, the trade between China and Europe was little to zero. There was nothing. Now it's more than 1 billion a day, the trade volume I'm talking about. It's about $600 billion of trade we are talking. And Mr. Öğütçü rightly suggests the Belt and Road Initiative. It's a giant. I mean, whether they will be able to deliver it or not, but it will be a real game changer. We definitely need intermodal connection lines. And again, as you rightly suggested, they had options. They never put the eggs in the same basket. And it's only logical for our countries, staying in the same line, geographically speaking, to take part in these initiatives. Looking these projects or efforts as if they are like, let's say, Trojan horse in the Western civilization or something, will be a bit naive. I mean, none of us are, in the end, ignorant, not knowing the world. We are serious states. If we realize some important aspects which are not in line with our national security, with our national policies, we'll just push the brakes. But other than this, you know, this is the reality of the life. Asia is rising. In many senses, production is there, energy is there. Black Sea Basin, just remember that after the Middle East, it's the second largest reserve holding region. And already we became transit countries to Europe. So there are huge opportunities. And if I may speak on behalf of my government, we are talking with the Chinese, with the Central Asian republics, that we have fraternity ties. We already developed some concrete projects so that we do not only speak, but try to put some concrete steps on the ground. An example being the recent inauguration of the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway road, for example. So from Caspian, and when we accomplish the connection to Istanbul, from Caspian to the Bulgarian-Greek border, we'll have an uninterrupted train connection, and it will be a high-speed train as well. We already did some giant projects linking Bosphorus, Undertunnel project, the third airport. All these projects, we believe, is not only projects that are invested for our own economy, but to get a share in this larger lining up.
What do you think is the most actionable right now in the spirit of what Mircea said when we started this conference? Let's talk. Conferences are great, but what can we do now? What do you think is the most tangible in the Black Sea region, in Romania, in Constanta maybe? What would be the lowest hanging fruit to start taking action?
Yeah, well, in academia, one of the famous theories is if you make more trade, there will be less war. Because, you know, the tradesmen will always push the brakes when there are problems within politicians. So we have to increase the trade in our region. In early 1990s, Mr. Geoana will remember very well, probably you took part in these initiatives as well, when Turkey spearheaded this Black Sea Economic Cooperation Initiative. It was a hype moment. Everybody was so eager then. Now it's not that much, lively, but still, when you go back and look back to the last quarter century, within this BISEC organization, for instance, we had some concrete results. For example, we have a bank which is located in Greece, which is actually financing concrete projects in member countries. Also, it offers us a platform for some countries who can never get together. For example, a Turkish diplomat visiting Yerevan, almost impossible. But thanks to BISEC, we have connections, or vice versa, an Armenian diplomat visiting Ankara. Or the same goes for Azerbaijan-Armenian diplomats. Or the same goes for now between Ukrainians and the Russians. So there are potential that we have to untap. Despite all these political and serious issues among the the complex tangle of issues in the region. And on our side, as I say, we continue to offer concrete projects so that we could actually attract more attention and investment here. One concrete project, for example, is just the one that you mentioned. It is connecting our ports. So the lack, I agree, the lack of a direct line between Constanta and Istanbul is unacceptable. We tried in the last decade a couple of times. We have our local leaders here. They are witness of it. But in the end, it's private driven. And when the private sector didn't see the net profit that they see through the land, they just stopped it.
So how do you say that it's unacceptable, but at the same time, private industry doesn't see the profit from
strategic,
it? So.
I'm talking, unacceptable. The thing is, when you give something in Istanbul to a truck driver, in the morning it's here, in Bucharest. But when you give the same thing to the ferry, or ro-ro line, if you say, it might take 3 days to come here. So that's why, it doesn't sound too much profitable for the private investor. But strategically, also for Turkey's own national interests, we would like to make this line, because we do not want to depend on only 2 countries to go out to the west. And in comparison with our relationships with other neighboring countries, Romania stands like a shining star, actually, in terms of our bilateral ties.
Shining star.
There is no, because there is no underlying difficulties historically or politically or psychologically.
So is the onus going to be on Turkey then to try and get that money, the investment, or to put government funds to it?
We try to do our best. Just last month, we had our experts from our transport ministry who get together with the Romanian counterparts here in Constanta. They checked opportunities not only on Ro-Ro, but also on Rola, which they will also use train, multimodal transport to go, especially to Central Europe. And we get some good results out of it. So on the governmental side, we do our best, decreasing some customs formalities, encouraging the private sector with some incentives so that they took to it, because in the end it's the private sector. There is, for example, an interesting project which is a nice example of globalization. We try to convince the French, saying that when you send Dacia to Turkey and when you send Renault from Turkey to Romania, and it's one of the biggest article in our bilateral trade, just let's use this Ro-Ro line instead of using the land line. So there are some creative ideas as well to revive this. And it's not only with Istanbul ports, but also some Black Sea ports of Turkey, so that from there it will go to Georgia and Iran as well.
I would really comment upon the ambassador's comment about smaller issues. Our bureaucracies in the region are traditionally very weak. There is still a lot of corruption around exchange of goods. I think there are bottlenecks that can be addressed. we've been proposing for some time to do on our border with Moldova, Republic of Moldova and Ukraine, because our immediate land neighbors, to do joint customs and border police as Poland and Ukraine do for years. We already Schengen equipped, so it's state of the art. We are not Schengen yet, but if you look to all our border crossing points, they're fully equipped. With Giurgiulești, not far from here, towards Galați and Moldova. Small things like this. The other thing I would like to mention, that of course, the more trade we do, the more business we do, the more human exchanges we do, the lesser chances for war and conflict. That's I think it's axiomatic, if you want. But I also believe in smart specialization. And Romania has something, and I see Mayor Făgădău back with us, and this part has a portion which there's not in direct competition with the Turkish economy. We are the 5th largest shipbuilding producers in Europe today. It's up to us to move this fantastic resource, which is based here. With one exception, I think in Giurgiu or someplace, or Turnul Severin, all the 5 major shipbuilding yards of Europe are here. One is Romanian, now 2 are Dutch, one is Italian, another is Norwegian. Why not move higher up on the value chain? We are here in the midst of an energy revolution for the Constanta port. Again, the Exxon and the Carlyles and the OMV Petroms in the Black Sea that I hope will happen, we are no competition to Turkey, in fact, because you have the big pipelines. We have another kind of destination. I talked to the rector of the university, together with the mayor and some of the members of the parliament from Constanta. I said, listen, anticipate the changes. Don't invest in education only in the things that you knew how to do some 20 years ago. Anticipate the fact that here will be a major energy hub. Constanta is unfortunately still weak on financial services. And Bogdan and the last panel will talk about this probably. We have a competitive advantage here that I think we should use. And again, this is nothing to do in taking the business away from the others. No, it's basically making more business together. Because a sophisticated economic zone, which I think the Greater Black Sea should become, needs all these ingredients together. And we need the Turkish economy, we need the Ukrainian economy, we need even the southern Russian ports on the Black Sea, because if it's benign trade, I need in Galați or in Brăila a container terminal for the wide railroad style of the Soviet Union style, and in Europe. We can do this, we should do this. So I think that there are lots of relatively practical things, from bureaucracy to innovation and technology, to anticipating the trends. And I think all of us should not be a zero-sum game. Today, the Black Sea area is a zero-sum game because of the geopolitics. I think we should reverse this thing and see, okay, who's good at what? And I think we'll find more complementarities and more synergies in our region than people think today. That's more business, that's more stability, that's more a virtuous cycle instead of this vicious circle that we see now.
And since we're talking about working closer together in the Black Sea region, I do want to put you on the spot a little bit, which you predicted when we first started talking. Given all the changes that we're seeing in Turkey, given an attempted coup, according to Mr. Erdogan, given the changes that we're seeing in the currency, what do you say to your neighbors wanting to make these partnerships? It's clear that a lot of people in power want to make these alliances. So given there's uncertainty right now, especially when it comes to the currency market in Turkey, what do you say to your neighbors then who look at that and might feel uneasy?
To say the thing that I should say last is Turkey's main axis in foreign policy does not change. It's the same. Its Western orientation is quite powerful. The backbone of our security is our membership in NATO. And despite huge difficulties with the US, including there's a kind of sabotage to our own economy, which seems to be passed, thanks God, after 1 month, we still try to protect our strategic partnership with the US, because we think it will not last forever.
So just to be clear, the sabotage, I assume you're saying, is the
to our
United States.
currency.
Yeah.
Because, with one tweet, in one day,
You're referring to
our
a tweet that
currency
President Trump sent.
depreciated,
Yeah.
many percent. When we read Turkey, I think we fell into the trap of reading only some photos of events and not read the context of it. In the last 4 years again, because I see it myself here in Romania as well, the image of Turkey started to be tarnished in the last 4 or 5 years. What happened in these 5 years? We had 5 different elections inside the country, which means the leaders should work mostly for domestic political considerations, which is normal everywhere. Second, we have the bloodiest coup attempt in our history. We lost 250 people. Third, we had to deal with at least 3 well-known notorious terrorist groups, including ISIS, the PKK, and this very notorious left-wing terror group who targeted British and US diplomats on Turkish soil as well. And we lost thousands of people. Turkey is the foremost country, unfortunately, who lost civilians at the hands of ISIS terrorism, other than Syria and Iraq. So under all these circumstances, you also add a huge refugee burden to the country. Yes, Turkey is big, but it's not that big. It's 80 million. And the refugee numbers now reach 4 million. We are hosting now 4 million people. And people fall to the trap of thinking so easily, saying that, well, it's easy for Turkey to host them, and culturally they are same. No, they're not same. I mean, we are
They
talking
don't even
about
speak
different
the
people.
same
They don't even
language.
speak the language, yes. We have 200,000 babies born in Turkey, Syrian babies. And we have 1 million kids that should go to school, but only about 700,000 of them are able to go to school. And these schooling are in Arabic, by the way. We are not imposing the Turkish curriculum. We are trying to hire Arabic teachers, etc. All these burdens aside, we try to protect our democracy, our free market economy, and the rule of law. And what happened after the coup attempt in Turkey? We felt compelled, and we had no other choice, to declare this emergency rule. And we said, once we feel that when this threat is eliminated, because we believe that there is a group which is called Fethullah Terrorist Organization, which is known as so-called Gülenists, and they are everywhere actually, and with using education as a front organization, they are using that. We said, once we feel ourselves secure in the state system, because all these Gülenists who are working in the state system in different ranks, from military to foreign ministry to intelligence services, we will continue this emergency rule. But we made our commitment saying that we are fully committed to our obligations within Council of Europe, which is a democracy backbone in the continent. We said we will not suspend the European Court of Convention of Human Rights, but we will just derogate from some of its rights, like detention periods, for example. And what happened after 2 years? Once the state felt that these former Gülenists were cleared from the state institutions, we abolished it. Now, after now 2-3 months, we just declared that we are going back to normal. We are focusing on reforms again. We are focusing on Turkey's EU membership process. And we decided to consolidate relationship back with the Council of Europe, which is deteriorated because of the emergency rule and the aftermath of the coup attempt. Imagine that there is an actor down there, which is very important, very vital, strategically, population-wise, etc. And this actor is saying, I have huge problems here, but still I'm a member of your family. But from the other side, they say, no, you're not longer with our family because you are shouting at us, you are saying nasty things, so you're not belonging us. So we also expected from our allies and partners an understanding. There were countries in Europe, like the Romanian government and the presidency, the Polish one, for example, the Swedish. I can name some other countries out. The British, for example, who understood what happened in Turkey because of probably their envoys who are reporting what's going on in the country. Because just while reading the European papers or the American ones, Washington Post or New York Times, you will get the sense as if Turkey is the worst country in the world where people are imprisoned and tortured in the prison There is a guy who is actually not elected, but he's a kind of a dictator, and he's pushing everybody, as if Turkey is worse than, the worst dictatorship in the world, which doesn't actually reflect the reality. The good thing is now, since the emergency rule is over and elections are over in Turkey, as you will see from the statements of our president as well, which is quite constructive, including the recent ones in the UN regarding the US, and now he's in Germany today, which you mentioned, which is a very important trip. It will just actually a concrete example of what I'm saying. These occasional difficulties are over. Turkey's place is within the Western family, in the European family. Whatever our relationship with individual countries are, this is a historic reality, a geographic reality. So simply as an answer to your question, we call on our friends to understand Turkey and to trust Turkey credentials as a strong, reliable partner in many senses.
And you still maintain that the alliance with NATO is very firm in spite of the tweet. I mean, you just called it sabotage, the tweet from President Trump. Regardless of that the NATO...
Yes, I mean, we hold the deed of NATO. 1/29th of the deed belongs to the Turks. So we are part of the family. It's not only the US. With US, we had difficulties in the past. The relationship has always been difficult, and there have been ups and downs. But we never question our credentials within NATO. And as a matter of fact, we are in top 5 contributors to allied operations. That's why militaries are always much closer than the political cadres, because they know what the Turkish military is doing on the ground on NATO operations. And still, we are among the very few countries who can project multimodal force projections in different geographies. So our presence in NATO and our commitment to NATO is unwavering. There's no question on that.
I just want to pivot a little bit. It's good to understand all of the background. There is so much emphasis here in the Black Sea about trade, about ports. Is it possible that the emphasis should be more tech-focused? I've talked to some people who say, places like Rotterdam, the big competitors really to Romania, they're starting to think about the next thing, renewable energy, some of the things that you were talking about in the previous panel. Is it possible it's too focused on what's kind of too obvious, if not too old, and that really a pivot needs to happen, something totally new, a big disruptor?
I think that in Romania as a whole, we have nuggets of the new economy. We have nuggets of the new economy. You see an immense appetite for multinational companies to establish R&D centers in Romania. This is
this Romanian DNA that I said that investors tell me that they have a lot of companies that on the surface may look very Western European, but that the backbone, the engineering is a lot of Romanian DNA.
Because it's a lot of communist legacy in exact sciences. I don't know if we are more talented in IT and software than others, but we have a legacy of math, of physics, of engineering, which is very strong. And that's an asset for the country. If we speak of the region and the gracious hospitality of the mayor of Constanta, I think that this part of Romania would need a boost, because they don't have the major, let's say, engineering universities that other big cities of Romania do possess, like Bucharest, like Cluj, like Iași. Where I think will be a combination for this part of Romania to leapfrog to would come, number one, from the new generation of energy and related issues. Secondly, by a transfer of know-how from the defense sector, which will continue to grow exponentially in this part of Romania, just because of the geography of the place. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks about the Romanian Navy and other things. There is a plan of the government to try to transfer some of the defense-related issues into, let's say, civilian operations. And the last thing that I think Romania should try, and if I would be in the shoes of the leaders leaders, not conveners, leaders of this part of Romania, I will really plead for a top-notch cybersecurity center in Constanta. Because the Romanian intelligence service is already doing cyber defense for Ukraine on behalf of NATO. We are exceptionally well positioned into this. So you need also, speaking of nuggets, you have to springboard some things. So these three things I can guarantee they could fly. There could be others. But I think that Romania is one of the countries that are very unevenly entering the fourth industrial revolution. Romania has a huge problem with labor force and the fact that we have so much economic migration. So we'll be in the situation to either have a huge effort to brain regaining the Romanians, at least in some professions, to come back, or not, to replace. And basically borrow engineers and borrow software engineers from other countries just to be filling the huge need that we need.
Like where?
I think there are good engineers in Ukraine. Of course, there are good engineers still in Republic of Moldova. There are good engineers in Georgia because there's still a former Soviet education system, which was not bad in technical science, exact sciences. I think we should try to basically, first of all, try to lure back our own guys because they left in big numbers. But we see researchers, Romanian researchers coming back to Magurele, which is the big accelerator European program. They're coming back by dozens. The moment you offer them something interesting, the moment a local university would leave some young Romanian academics that are now in London or in Zurich or in Silicon Valley to return and have their professorship back and not resist their return, we'll see the nuggets becoming bigger and changing basically the structure of the Romanian economy. That's the game changer. And Constanta should be in the forefront of the change of our structure of our economy. And I think there are ingredients in this part of Romania, this part of Europe, of Eurasia, to make this transit to the new economy, which is happening anyway, with or without us. With or without us.
And I'm going to be unfair to you because I'm going to ask you both. I'm going to ask you really two questions in the sense that I'm going to ask you the same question. What else can a place like Romania do that maybe isn't so obvious? Here in Constanta, for example, same question, but also the same for Turkey. What is Turkey's role in technology now as well? Because that's where this question is really aimed at, is tech. So I'll ask you to speak on behalf of Romania and Turkey. You have double duty.
Actually, I also have some knowledge because of the fact that there are also a very vibrant Turkish investor community here in Romania. So I have first-hand information from the business environment here as well.
Share it with us.
Yeah. For instance, one of these refrigerator producer, which is a very important brand of Romania, an old one, Arctic, is owned by a giant Turkish group, which is also producing household appliances and televisions. Their TVs, for example, are number one in the UK market, Beko brand. They just made a new investment.
Grundig in Germany.
And Grundig as well.
It's a global giant.
Yes,
it's a global giant.
They just made a new investment again in Gaesht, near to their already existing factory, and the new factory is based on Industry 4.0. They invited us there. We also visited the factory. It was amazing indeed. It will rely on less manpower. And I realized that they also bring people from Turkey, from their R&D section, to see the factory, because this is the first factory as a group they did in the world. So imagine that we are so globalized that they are doing it somewhere else, and people from Turkey, from their own company, are coming here to see how they did it in Romania. But this labor problem is a huge crisis. From little shop owners to large factories, people are really are in dire need. We are also talking with our Romanian counterparts in the government of how can we solve the problems. More and more people are bringing workers, even from Asia, from Nepal, India, for example, Vietnam. I know some Turks are doing it already. I think I will just say the same thing that Mr. Mayor said and Mr. Geoana said as well. On the IT sector, there's a huge potential here because of the skilled force and because of the language skill. Romanians are not aware of it, but because of the Latin root of their language, they have a very good command of French, Spanish, Italian. English is much easier for an average Romanian to learn, unlike an average Turk, for example, because of the language nature. So this helps a lot, and it's quite competitive, very well integrated. And being a member of the EU is, of course, a great opportunity in that sense. So I will also focus on the IT part of the whole picture. And it should be creative, of course, from, as you say, from cybersecurity or the newly fledgling industry of defense here. As you know, there will be now corvettes being built here. And I know that the Romanian government is eager to have a larger national share in all these projects.
Can I make a final comment?
Absolutely.
Because I think our time is up. I think we should use Brexit. I mean, it's not my decision. It's the British people who decided that they want to do whatever they want to do. I think it's a huge loss for all of us. But I think that in terms of IT, BPO, nearshoring, and luring some of the back office jobs in London, in the city of London, that are trying to find European location for Europe passports and the whole thing. I know other cities in Romania that are going to London, trying to talk to banks there that have to relocate some of the back offices. Constanta would be an idea. Look at this wonderful place. I think we should try to be...
The beach isn't quite as nice in London.
The beach is not great in London anyways. So I'm just saying that we should also be opportunistic in a smart sense, in a good sense, in a business sense, in a loyal sense. But I think we have to make the most of the situation that we are a safe country, a stable country, a predictable country that has still something to offer.
And I'm already hearing from so many startups, I mean, I've been hearing it for a year now, that the amount of people applying from Romania, Poland, etc., because they just don't know what the situation is going to be. So certainly seems like a Carlos Slim style opportunity. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mircea.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you all.